Conference, please join me in welcoming the man that is leading the fight to end austerity and the shambles surrounding everything Theresa May touches. Conference, please give a massive Welsh Labour welcome to the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Welsh Labour, for that welcome. And thank you, Caroline, for what you just said about the strength and joy of our party. And thank you, Bridie, for that lovely introduction and all that you do as acting chair of Welsh Labour. Thank you to our team. Why not say thank you to them all? Come on, you can say it. And it's great to be here in Llandudno. It's such a fantastic town and a beautiful part of the country, and the weather today is incredible, so I'm sorry you're all inside and there's others outside enjoying the sun, but you can do that later. And it's great to be amongst friends and feel the energy and the strength of Welsh Labour. I want to begin by remembering a Welsh Labour hero, Paul Flynn, MP for Newport West from 1987 when I first got to know him, until sadly he passed away last February. And I had a lovely chat with him a couple of weeks before he died when he was in the hospice. Paul was a pioneer. He didn't see being an MP as an end in itself. He knew that he could use Parliament as a tool for social change. He was fiercely independent on the backbenches, and he once joked in the House of Commons that for the past 26 years I've been a backbencher by choice. Not just my choice, it was the choice of the past 5 leaders of the party as well. And so I was honoured to have him in my shadow cabinet in 2016. He was a superb representative for his constituents and a truly wonderful man. Thank you, Paul, for everything you did for all of us, and you lightened our lives so much. And let's all give a big congratulations to our newest Labour MP, Ruth Jones. Ruth, where are you? Ruth, well done on your brilliant by-election win. It showed that the people of Newport reject austerity and want a real alternative that only Labour can offer. Well done, Ruth, on winning the election. And I know that you'll be a powerful voice for your community in Parliament. I also want to thank Christina Rees, Shadow Secretary of State for Wales, for standing up for Wales in Westminster and being that voice for Wales around the Shadow Cabinet table. And of course, I couldn't come here and not give my warmest congratulations to Mark Drakeford on becoming the new leader of Welsh Labour and the new First Minister of Wales. Mark, you care passionately about creating a more equal society, and it's a great pleasure to work alongside you, and I'm excited about what we can achieve together if we were both in government. And we will be. And can I also say thank you to Ellen Ed Morgan and Vaughan Gething for the positive way that you both campaigned in the leadership contest, and now the party has come together. And I also want to pay tribute to Carwyn Jones for all his achievements as First Minister. Thank you, Carwyn, for all that's been achieved in Wales. Conference. These have been intense weeks, indeed intense months in politics. Let's be honest, our Westminster political system hasn't come out of it too well. We can be honest about that. People watch the back and forth in Parliament. They see the arcane procedure and they hear the alien language. It is another world. For me, that's not what real politics is about. Real politics comes from the ground up. Real politics is about the nitty-gritty of life in your community and on your street, about the reality of your life at work. Real politics, for me, is about empowering people who don't have a lot of money and don't have friends in high places so that they can take control of their own life. My job as leader of our party, and our job in our party, the Labour Party, is to champion those people, to stand up for those communities and push for real change. First, to change society where all true progress comes from. Then to represent that change in Westminster, which, to be honest, is usually the last place to begin to understand it. But when the focus of our national conversation is dominated by baffling procedures in Parliament and when nothing seems to change, I understand why people feel frustrated. And I understand that when it comes to Brexit, most people just want politicians to sort this out. So when the Prime Minister announced she wanted to speak to me to find a Brexit compromise, I very generously agreed. I didn't have any advance notice of her invitation, by the way. I found out when I heard it on television, which we turned on in my office as I was meeting a cooperative group of MPs. And they very generously said, you don't need to spend too long answering our questions because we think you've got something else to do now. But it is scandalous that it came so late in the Brexit process. Not at the 11th hour, not even at 5 to midnight, but at 5 past midnight, after the Prime Minister had missed her own deadline of the 29th of March. Nevertheless, we're engaging in talks in a serious and constructive way. But we must see those red lines moving, and we must see real compromise by the government. And I have to say, it's a challenge to negotiate with a government that is collapsing all around us. When you can't be sure if commitments made by the Prime Minister will survive the week, and when Cabinet collective responsibility has given way to collective irresponsibility, with ministers battling it out on the airwaves. Nearly everyone now agrees that the Prime Minister could and should have tried to build a consensus much earlier. We might be in a very different place if she had. But instead, she stuck rigidly to a flawed plan. She ran down the clock and ran out of time. The extension she's had to agree is a result of her failure and is yet another milestone in this government's mishandling of all aspects of Brexit. Just 3 weeks ago, she said she wasn't prepared to delay Brexit beyond the 30th of June. But now we're holding European elections, not knowing whether MEPs will take their seats or for how long. It is an extraordinary situation. We cannot remain stuck in this loop for another 6 months. I urge the Prime Minister not to see this extension as another chance to flog her dead deal, not MV4, please. Let me explain why Labour won't accept a deal. It comes back to what I said about real politics, about representing communities. Theresa May's discredited deal reflects the kind of country the Tories want to create. A harsh society where wealth and power is hoovered up by a privileged elite rather than shared fairly by the majority. Labour has always said we respect the result of the referendum. But we cannot respect the way the Tories have tried to use Brexit to make the lives of working class people harder and harder. Because for the Tories, Brexit is about more than just leaving the European Union. For them, Brexit is a smokescreen behind which they want to push through the most uncaring dog-eat-dog version of the future that they can get away with. That explains why Conservative MPs are so hostile to our proposal for a customs union that would protect jobs, because their real agenda, what this is really about, is doing trade deals with the likes of Donald Trump that would deliver chlorinated chicken, hormone beef to our dinner tables, that would very dangerously open up our National Health Service to giant American healthcare corporations. The Tories will always put profits before people. That's what the real difference is. "17 million people voted to leave the EU, but they didn't vote for Britain to become an offshoot of Trump's America. They didn't vote for a race to the bottom. That's why we've put forward what I believe to be a sensible alternative plan that would ensure a close economic relationship with the EU. It would abide by the result of the referendum without wrecking our economy. Labour will carry on talking to the government to see if we can secure an agreement that achieves that aim. If it's not possible, we believe all options remain on the table, including the option of a public vote on it. But conference, I'm very worried about the divisions in our society. The Tories took their endless infighting and projected it onto the nation as a whole, and we're all living with the consequences. Many people who voted to leave feel angry that the Brexit they hoped for hasn't happened yet. Many who voted to remain feel anxious that the Brexit they dread could still happen. So how do we go forward from here? We could all retreat into our respective side of the argument and let bitterness drive us apart. We could allow ourselves to be defined only as Remainers or Leavers, labels that meant nothing to any of us only a few years ago. But where would that take us? Who wants to live in a country locked in an endless spiral of recrimination and division? What we need now is understanding. Understanding of why so many people felt so alienated and dissatisfied with the system that they voted to leave, and understanding of why so many others believe the only way to protect our open and proudly diverse society is to stay in the EU. Many people have got this the wrong way round. They think first the question is leave or remain, as if either is an end in itself. I think they're wrong. The first question is, what kind of society do we want to be? And on that, we can find so much common ground. You see, Labour doesn't believe that the real divide in society is between people who voted remain or leave to the European Union. We believe the real divide is between the many who do the work, create the wealth and pay their taxes, and the few who set the rules, reap the rewards and dodge their taxes. Now look, I know there's a bit of rivalry between North and South Wales, but really, we don't want to set the hard-up family in Cardiff that voted to remain against the equally hard-up family in Wrexham that voted to leave. We want to bring people together. Tory austerity means both families are up against it, but they're not up against each other. So our mission is to back working class communities in all their diversity. Only Labour has been consistently trying to find a way through this deadlock that can bring people together so we can get on with the job of making sure our country works for the many, not just the few. People are fed up with the vital issues that affect their daily lives being ignored because of Brexit. Due to Tory austerity, public services are under huge pressure. Violent crime is rising. Life expectancy is falling. Our climate is in danger and dying. None of these things are being addressed at the moment. But this isn't just about neglect. It's about deliberate government policy. The Conservatives found £1 billion for a deal with the DUP to keep themselves in power and wasted £4 billion on a no-deal Brexit, while they've cut £1 billion from the budgets of Wales. These Tory cuts have a very, very real effect. Wales faces the highest relative poverty in the United Kingdom, with almost 1 in 4 people living in relative income poverty. And it's clear to me where the blame lies. It's the Westminster government's cuts and changes to benefits that are behind the increase in poverty, rough sleeping and homelessness in Wales. When the United Nations sent Philip Alston, an expert on poverty, here last year to write a report, he recognised the work of the Welsh Government to mitigate the worst impacts of austerity. But he said, and I'm quoting him directly, that it is outrageous that devolved administrations need to spend resources to shield people from government policies. He's right. In fact, the remarkable thing is how much the Welsh Government has achieved despite the cuts coming from the Tories in Westminster. In Wales, you don't have the internal market in the National Health Service. You don't have prescription charges. You have a much better housing policy with no damaging right to buy, and soon letting fees will be banned, which could save renters almost £200 per tenancy. You have comprehensive schools, which haven't been outsourced to the private sector, unlike those that have in England. And the early years education that's been developed in Wales looks after kids in the poorest communities and gives them a fair start in life. Children who get a good start in life in preschool do so much better in primary and secondary, adult education, universities and everything else because they're given that good start. I want all children in every part of Britain to get a real good start in life. But this has been achieved in Wales because you have Labour in office. Contrast the Welsh Labour government with the UK Conservative government. When the Welsh government stepped up to protect the steel industry, where was the Westminster government? Gone AWOL, absent without leave. And whilst the Welsh government targets 70% of all electricity to come from renewable sources, the Westminster government rejected the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon project. Labour would reverse that decision. A Labour government in London would invest in Wales and work with the Welsh government on a strategy to direct cash where it's most needed. The days when governments could get away with sitting back and leaving all the major decisions about our economy and our lives to the mystery of market forces are over. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked, it doesn't work, and it will never work. Let me give you an example of what we should be doing instead. We are all facing a climate crisis. There's no greater threat to our future. And fundamentally, the destruction of our climate is actually a class issue. It's working class communities that suffer the worst effect as our environment declines, whether it's air pollution or flooding or stratospheric food prices. While the rich can pay their way out of trouble, we need to act. We need nothing less than a green industrial revolution. Labour will put public investment into renewable energy on a massive scale. And that's not a burden, it's a huge opportunity to bring new manufacturing and engineering jobs to places that have never recovered from the destruction of industry at the hands of Margaret Thatcher and her Tory government of the 1980s. Historically, the industry that changed Britain and changed Wales was, of course, coal. The miners who dug it out were the backbone of this country and indeed of this party. But they were treated appallingly by their bosses and by the very wealthy establishments that lived well off the coal profits. It was vividly described by the great Welsh poet Idris Davies. He wrote this: "My fathers in the mining valleys were slaves who bled for beer, who had no saviour to acclaim, and whose God was fear. And they sold the fern and flower, and the groves of pine, for a hovel and a tankard, and the dregs are mine. So in these rain-swept graveyards, where my fathers sleep, shall I sulk and curse them who made their lives so cheap? Or shall I pause and pity those luckless lads of old, whose sullen slaves whipped onwards to load my lords with gold? What brilliant words by Idris. Coal powered the first industrial revolution, which propelled us into the modernity we have. It was done on the backs of the working class and at the expense of our environment. So the green industrial revolution will be about unwinding both of those injustices. It will harness green technologies to tackle the climate crisis and create well-paid, high-skilled and secure jobs. And we will provide the education and technical training needed for people to be able to take up those roles. Technology and manufacturing don't have to be a threat to the environment. Just look out at the sea here. What do you see off the shore of Llandudno? One of the biggest offshore wind farms in the world, producing a massive share of the energy needs of Wales and creating local jobs in manufacturing. The situation couldn't be more urgent, not just here, but around the world. We're seeing ice caps melting, coral reefs dissolving, droughts in Africa, hurricanes in the Americas, and wildfires in Australia. Cyclone Idai recently killed more than 700 people in Southeast Africa, largely in Mozambique, and affected 3 million more. And the floods in Iran have killed 70 in recent days, with international relief efforts dangerously hindered by US sanctions. Conference, as socialists, we know that all of these issues, from the local to the international, are about the distribution of wealth and power. But power doesn't only come from above. The power to transform the world really comes from below. It comes from social movements, from trade unions, and from communities. What was the greatest social achievement of the 20th century? Obviously, it was the National Health Service, free healthcare as a right for all. But the NHS wasn't dreamt up by politicians in Westminster. It was based on the Medical Aid Society in Tredegar, organised by working class communities in the valleys. That local idea changed British society and reverberated around the world. I was in Mexico last year to witness the inauguration of my friend, the new president of Mexico, the socialist president of Mexico. And I said to him, to my friend Andrés Manuel López Obrador, what's the one thing you like from Britain, and what would you like us to be able to support you in doing? And he said, the one thing I would like to import from Britain to Mexico would be a national health service so that everyone in Mexico could get the health care that people in Britain get because of the Labour Party's achievement in post-war Britain. What a wonderful thing for AMLO to say. And it goes back to what I said earlier about real politics not being about obscure customs in Parliament. These are political leaders in every community driving change. Many of them would never call themselves leaders. You know the people, but they are leaders. I'm thinking of mothers who organise residents to get their block cleaned and the damp removed, and the fast food worker who organises her colleagues to demand a living wage. So, when we defeat this government, and we will, it will be as communities coming together, and we'll go into government as communities together, with Labour in power in Westminster and in Cardiff Bay, and Labour organised in every community across the country. We will transform Wales and we will transform Britain so that They work for the many, not the few. That's what real politics is about. Thank you very much.